Hi, folks. We're going to get started now. So welcome to the Russell Sage Foundation's webinar on essentially how to apply to the foundation for funding. And we'll go over some things like the various program areas we have, the various funding streams we have, and we'll talk a little bit about the process, which often helps folks figure out how best to construct their applications to the foundation. My name is Stephen Glauser. I am a program officer here at the foundation, and I'll let my colleague Deandra introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deandra Durand. I'm the program assistant at the Russell Sage Foundation.
Yeah, and so, we'll just jump right into it.
First, a few things before we get started into the full presentation. I'd just like to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded and will be available on our website within, I would say, a week after this webinar is conducted. If you have questions about that, always feel free to email us at programs@rsage.org. For any questions that you may have during the presentation, I would highly suggest that you utilize the Q&A function. And please keep in mind that we will be answering any questions after the presentation. We will have time to answer questions, but during the presentation, we will not be responding to questions. That will happen after our presentation. We ask that you refrain from asking project-specific related questions. Try and keep them a little more broad. If you do have any specific questions that you would like answered, we're more than happy to help you sort out those questions by emailing us at programs@rsage.org. And of course, anybody can reach out to us for any questions that they have about their projects and RSF programs. So a little bit about us as a foundation. The Russell Sage Foundation is one of the oldest foundations in the United States, founded in 1907 by the widow of former or late financier Russell Sage, Margaret Olivia Sage. And she establishes the Russell Sage Foundation for the improvement of social and living conditions in the United States. So that basically means anything that we fund has to be a US-centered project. That is part of our mission, and that's what we were funded to do. Between 1907 and 1944, the Russell Sage Foundation primarily focused on community development projects and more public health type of projects. So, for example, there is a development in Queens called the Forest Hills that was funded partially through money from the Russell Sage Foundation, and you will actually find a park called Russell Sage Foundation Park or Russell Sage Park in Forest Hills, and that is directly because of the money that we provided. From 1945 to the present, we shifted our focus and have become a social science research where we try and strengthen methods and data and theory in the social sciences, again, for the betterment of improving social conditions in the United States.
So I'll go over a few of our program priorities. We have 4 main program areas here at the foundation. First, we have a program area in the behavioral sciences. We call this behavioral science and decision-making in context. You may have been previously familiar with a version of this that we just called behavioral economics, but we really wanted to broaden this beyond just economics. So this is sort of behavioral science generally. And we're looking for questions on like choice architecture, anything sort of in the nudge space, anything looking at why humans make decisions the way that they do, from the various social science disciplines, not just economics, not just psychology, but also in political science and in sociology and other social science adjacent fields as well. Then we have what we like to call the future of work. This has become a bit of a buzzword in the past few years, but we've had a future of work program since 1994. Here we're primarily concerned with things like job quality. We're concerned with things like the effects of automation. It can be about worker power and unionization versus monopsony power, projects looking at all sorts of these issues, but generally things that have to do with labor and things like that go into our future of work program. Then we have a newer program on race, ethnicity, and immigration. This has really come to be when we merged two previous programs that we had. We had a program on cultural contact, and we had a program on immigration, and we have merged the two of them. Under that initiative, under that program, we have a current special initiative on immigration and immigrant integration that's specifically co-funded by the Carnegie Corporation. And then finally, we have another longstanding program on inequality. This used to be called the Social Inequality Program, but that we've tried to brand that as a little bit more broad. So it's now social, political, and economic inequality. We're essentially interested in the effects of inequality broadly. That can be educational inequalities, that can be income inequality, that can be wealth inequality, and looking at the various effects of those. At the next deadline in November, we are accepting LOIs in all of these program areas and special initiatives. On occasion, and it's a good thing to keep in mind in the future, Russell Sage will limit the applications we get to a couple of these programs. That's if we find we've been getting too many applications, but for now, we are accepting LOIs in all of these programs. Each of these program areas has a specific RFP. Those RFPs are available on our website and are full of things like example research questions and topics of research that we are interested in. I do want to note that all of those RFPs are not exhaustive. It is very possible and actually it's almost a certainty that a lot of questions that are not listed there, we are still interested in. If you have any questions about whether your project is a fit for the foundation, always feel free to email us at programs.rsage.org. Now I'm going to go over a little bit of the differences between, we have two upcoming deadlines in a month. One is for our pipeline grants and the other is for our more regular research grants. And so I just want to make sure that folks have a good idea of the differences between the two of them. The pipeline grants are primarily designed for assistant professors. We define that as assistant professors on the tenure track and not on the tenure track. And if you are a teaching professor or lecturer with some different title, but you got your PhD after January 2014, you're eligible. One interesting thing about the Pipeline Grants Program is that you can only be eligible for it if you have never received Russell Sage Research Grant or Russell Sage Fellowship. One of the goals of this is to help diversify the social sciences and our funding portfolio. We define diversity broadly. That can be racial diversity, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, but also institutional diversity. So we are funding beyond R1s. And geographic diversity. So we're not just funding, say, in the Northeast, we're funding institutions across the spectrum of this country. New this year, we've done an inflation adjustment for these grants. Previously, the limit was $30,000, but these are one-year grants up to $35K for individual applicants. Or if teams apply and all members of the team are eligible, as in all of them are assistant professors or something like that, they can apply for up to $50,000. You do not need a budget at the time of application. We just need a proposal narrative and a CV. And the funds can be used for all sorts of things like summer salary, purchasing data, research assistance, course buyouts, conference travel, etc. This program has a mentorship component, and we also have a capstone conference where the cohort presents work in progress or finished to each other and gets feedback from both the rest of the cohort and other experts that we invite. That's the pipeline grants. The other thing that and I would say the majority of our funding goes to our regular research grants. These are the pre-existing things that Russell Sage has been doing for a long time. Pipeline grants just started in 2019, I believe. So our regular research grants is a two-stage proposal. You have to submit a short 4-page LOI first. Those go through a peer review process. If it is approved there, we will then invite full proposals. We require that you have a PhD. These are up to 2-year grants for up to $200,000. If you are below $75,000, we call that a presidential grant because it does not have to go to our board of trustees for approval. Our president makes those decisions. But the peer review process, as you will see in the rest of this presentation, is almost identical except for that last step. We also fund a lot of standard research costs, things like summer salary, data, research assistance. Unlike the pipeline grants, we do not generally fund course buyouts unless you have a particularly high load. And we generally don't fund conference travel, though we do fund travel for data collection, say qualitative interviews or something like that. We usually have 3 deadlines a year for these LOIs. One's usually in the spring, either April or May, one's in midsummer, July or August, and then one's in the fall in November. So I'm going to go and, oh, sorry. I think this is yours, Deandra.
Hello. Yes, it is. So just to add more to what Stephen was saying about the research grants. So there are 3 research grant cycles a year. The next LOI deadline will be November 7th of this year. And the research grants fall into 2 categories. First is the trustee awards, which is a max of $200,000, including 15% indirect costs. And the second category is presidential awards, with a max of $50,000 with no allowed indirect, or $75,000 for data collection or for salary support for multiple assistant professors. Just as an FYI, both of these categories have the same application process. So if there's no separate application process for trustee awards, there's no separate for presidential, they all go into the same bucket. The only difference is really the amount that you are requesting for your research project. And at the end, who makes the final decisions of the funding, which we will go into in the next slide. So in the next slide here, we see that the review process. So first is the submission of your letter of inquiry or LOI. Again, like I said before, we have 3 cycles a year, typically in May, August, and November. So this November will be the final application cycle for year 23. Anything that gets funded in November would be awarded in March. And your notification, the earliest that you could start your application would be April 1st. So those will be discussed later. But
just a quick correction. I think the November LOIs actually go to our June board meeting for approval. So you could start with November LOIs could start funding next summer.
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you for the correction. Anyway, so we have 3 funding cycles a year. Our first step is to do an internal staff review where we basically figure out which of the applications are aligned with RSF funding priorities, and move them, and then we move the ones that we feel match our funding priorities, basically meaning is their project centered on US focused interests? Do they have education outcomes or health outcomes? And as an FYI, we do not fund projects that have health or education outcomes. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. So once we suss through those LOIs, we move them on to external peer review, where we invite interdisciplinary reviewers to review our LOIs for the cycle to see which ones will be moved forward, or to give their opinions and thoughts about funding or moving to full proposals. Now we do our best to match the LOIs to the projects that are methodologically and disciplinarily matched. So once we get all those reviews in, it moves on to the, we basically figure out which ones we want to invite to full proposals. Full proposals are typically about 20 pages, and include budget justification, and other things that you will be notified about. Sorry, the alarms are going. And then once we get through the peer review, oh my goodness, I apologize.
No, it's a national alert system. Everyone's cell phone is probably blowing up right now.
Yes. Sorry.
Just real quick, I do want to note, I think, Deandra, you said that we don't generally fund work that has health outcomes or educational outcomes. There's some nuance to that. We generally don't fund health outcomes because Russell Sage, as a moderately sized foundation, is looking to sort of fill a niche. So if you're primarily focused on mental health outcomes or other health outcomes, we really feel that there's other funders that are investing heavily in those spaces, like NIH and Robert Wood Johnson and others. That doesn't mean that a project looking at health outcomes in addition to other outcomes that the foundation that Russell Sage is interested in, say economic outcomes or various social outcomes, that doesn't mean we wouldn't be interested at all. It's just that if it's the main outcome that you're looking at in your project, then we have less interest in it. And on the education point, there's a lot of nuance there. We think that there's a lot of funding out there looking at evaluations of educational curricula and things like that. And we tend to try to encourage folks to apply to places like the Spencer Foundation for work like that. But if you're looking at more like long-term educational outcomes that may lead to various job attainment or something like that, or skills development or something like that, we could still be interested in it. So again, I really recommend that you sort of try to have a conversation with one of us about whether your project is going to be a fit. We're not really interested in like specific educational program evaluations, but if we're looking at educational outcomes more on the longer term, or especially looking at various differences by race, ethnicity, income, SES, et cetera, then we could still be interested in it. So there's a lot of nuance to these things, and I highly recommend that you send us an email to sort of figure out if your project is in that space, or if we think you should maybe apply to a different foundation or a different funder.
All right, thank you for the clarifications. So moving on, and thank you again for your patience with the alarms going off. So once the proposals are externally reviewed, our staff reviews the comments, and we invite a certain number of those proposals to respond to reviewer requests or reviewer comments. And those comments are then reviewed by the advisory committee. Now, depending again on whether or not your proposal is or your LOI is a trustee or presidential grant, trustee grants go to the advisory committee. Presidential grants are reviewed and approved by our president, Sheldon Denzinger. So November LOIs will be invited to submit full proposals for this cycle on November 21st. Funding decisions will be made at the June 24th Board of Trustees meeting. And the earliest start date that you can have is July 1st of 2024.
All right, so I'm going to go a little bit more into this pipeline grants competition. A lot of the stuff I mentioned already, but just to reiterate, we do have eligibility differences compared to our regular research grants. Apparently, I forgot to edit this page because the one-year grants are, as I mentioned previously, up to $35K for individual or $50K for teams. So please disregard that $30,000 limit right there. These are generally one-year projects, and that's sort of 1 year in the ideal sense. We completely understand that there are oftentimes delays in accessing data, or delays in IRB approval, or any of the other number of things that can go wrong in the research process. But we want this to be a sort of thing that you could do in 1 year when you're thinking about scope. This is unlike our research grants that Deandra just went over. This is a one-stage application process. I see that there is a question in the chat, and we said we wouldn't cover these questions, but it is directly relevant here. The pipeline grants are peer-reviewed, just like our regular research grants. And we will go over how our peer review process goes in more detail soon. But yes, these are peer-reviewed. And similar to our presidentials, indirects are not allowed on pipeline grants. The mentorship component we think is a very important part of this. We sort of come to that collaboratively. The way that works is I talk with the applicant, have them brainstorm some potential names for mentors. We also ask our advisory committee to come up with names, because it's always possible, like folks on the senior academics on our advisory committee may have connections that the applicant may not have, or may have ideas about who could be a good mentor. And then I work with the applicant to come up with a list in an ordered fashion about who I will contact in what order, and then we'll ask them to be mentors. The mentorship, we sort of expect it will be different for every project. Sometimes we ask them to be more data intensive or methodologically intensive. We ask all of them to be sort of career advisors as well. So sometimes it's nice to have someone not in your department, not at your institution, to talk about the tenure process with, or to talk about the various institutional bureaucracies that you have to go through at your institution, and ways to navigate that, or talk about like who to use as a letter writer for tenure. All those things, we think all of those are in bounds for discussions with your mentors. We've had folks say that they talk to their mentor weekly, others bi-weekly, others monthly. You check in via email. People have different communication like needs and desires, but we sort of see this as they are technically mentoring you on this project, but the scope of what you can talk to them about is beyond just that. I mentioned the Capstone Conference. We have work that is presented at all sorts of stages. Just like I mentioned previously, there's always delays in research. So at these conferences, we have folks presenting very preliminary work. Some are still folks haven't even been able to get out into the field yet and are still presenting on their research design, and other folks are sort of presenting very well polished, almost ready to submit to papers or have already been published work. So it's really across the whole landscape of where you can be in the research process. And I think that leads to a really collaborative space. It leads to you get good feedback, interdisciplinary feedback from peers and from more senior academics. I sort of mentioned already the ways that some of these funds can be used. The main thing you have to know is that the deadline this year is on November 1st, 2023. Similar to our other program areas, we do have a pipeline grant specific RFP. And as I said before, it is not exhaustive. There's no way we can put out a document that lists every single research question that we're interested in. The ones that we do list are in areas that we're interested in and are examples. But if you are unsure of whether your project is a fit, please email us. We should always be able to have a conversation with you about that. I do want to talk quickly about another funding opportunity that you should be made aware of. This will be a deadline in the spring. This is our dissertation research grants program. This is for PhD students who are essentially ABD. We give up to $10,000. They can use the funds for all sorts of research costs, but also they can have a stipend of up to $5,000. Similar to the pipeline grants process, this is a one-step application process. We just need a 5-page narrative with a CV. And all of these sort of tips that we have for the other proposals that we talk about are applicable to this. And I encourage you to have your grad students reach out to us as that deadline comes up. Deandra, I think this is your slide.
Yes. So in addition to the regular research grant opportunities and the pipeline and dissertation research grant programs, the Russell Sage Foundation also hosts fellowships for I would say senior scholars, including one of our cornerstone programs, the Visiting Scholar Program, which is a 10-month fellowship for PhD holders post 3 years of receiving their PhD. Typically, we start accepting applications around June. So the next Visiting Scholar application will be June 25th for the class of 25 and 26. For this program, we usually accept about 17, roughly around 17 scholars a year. The other scholars or fellowship is the visiting researcher and visiting journalist program, which we both accept the application for around May. Again, this is a shorter term typically, but the benefits of both of these programs is that scholars and researchers are in residence at the foundation, mingling with each other and really trying to create a collaborative spirit among the participants. The other program I like to highlight is the Summer Institutes for early career scholars. Eligibility is for PhD students, postdocs, early career faculty. Some of our past summer institutes have included behavioral economics, proposal development, and migration research methods. Our next one, and correct me if I'm wrong, is going to be the Proposal Development Institute. Right now.
Sure, we're actually not sure of which ones are going to happen next summer. We'll know later this fall. We're in discussions. It's possible that both the behavioral economics and the proposal development summer institutes may be happening. I encourage everyone to sign up for our mailing list. They email once a month. But yeah, we will find out, I think, at our November board meeting this fall is when they will decide which ones will be going forward for next summer.
Exactly. Our newsletter is a really great resource to keep up to date on deadlines for programs and for any other things happening at the foundation, including our journal, the Russell Sage Foundation Journal of the Social Sciences. It's an open access interdisciplinary journal. So feel free to also look into that and see if you would like to submit any journal applications. There is no restrictions for us based on citizenship, country of study, or country of employment, as long as your research is US focused. We don't have any restrictions based on citizenship, country of origin, or study. Next slide, please. And now just a little background about the reviewers and our roles here at the foundation. So first, the RSF program staff. Our role here is to internally screen the initial LOIs and to assess the fit of the program or the projects that are being applied for our programs. So again, we're very friendly here. We're always open to talking with you and to helping to guide you in the application process as best as we can. But our whole mission here is to make sure that the programs are running smoothly and that your programs fit with our priorities. Next is our external reviewers. Again, this is an interdisciplinary organization, and we try and have as wide a group of experts, including economists, psychologists, political scientists, sociologists, all of them, because we want to have the broadest scope possible. And when we're selecting reviewers to provide feedback on LOIs and proposals, we do our best to match them based on discipline and methodology. The RSF advisory committees, these are standing committees of interdisciplinary experts recruited by our program staff or program area. And they meet 3 times a year to discuss, and they're part of the reviewing process as well. And they, at the end of the day, they kind of may decide which projects move forward for funding consideration by the Board of Trustees. And finally, our Board of Trustees serve as the final decision-making on all proposals, $75,000 to $200,000. So those are the trustee grants. And these individuals are the ones who make the final decisions on those on which projects are ultimately funded.
Great. So I think it's good to give folks an idea of what we are asking our reviewers to do so that you know what to include in your narrative. The first thing we ask is, are the research questions important and compelling? So we really are looking for a question-driven proposal. And then we want to see some sort of hypotheses that are matched to those questions. And then second, are the research design, data, and methods well matched to that research question? If you are proposing causal work, do you have the power to make that, to make those claims? If you are proposing descriptive work, why are these the correct? Is there some data limitation? Is there some other reason why this is the way that we're going about this? Then we also ask them, is there any expertise needed to carry out the project? We are primarily relying on CVs to work on this. Like, we don't want someone who's has no experience with qualitative interviews proposing a project to do qualitative interviews. We want to make sure that folks have the training necessary. And sometimes we suggest adding a consultant on the project or adding an additional PI or something like that. Then next we ask them what the contribution is. Is this like going to blow everyone out of the water? Is this going to result in a couple papers in a decent journal? Like, is this going to produce a data set that other researchers can use in the future? Sort of what would the sum total of this project's contribution be? And then finally, we ask them sort of catch-all. Do they have anything else that they can add? I think what you really need to take away from this are that those first two bullets are the things that we are primarily looking at, or we're asking them to look at, because we want to see in whatever narrative you're putting together, if it's in the pipeline grants, then we want to see or if it's in an LOI that you're submitting, we want to see a majority of the space in that narrative be dedicated to this sort of, like, we want to see the research design be the majority of the space, because that is what we are asking them to dive into. One way to think about it is, as on the previous slide, Deandra was listing how we go from Russell Sage staff as internal reviewers to peer reviewers who are matched to the project topically or methodologically. So your first audience is a team of generalists here at the foundation. We maybe used to have some expertise in some field, but we no longer do, because we are reading across all of these disciplines, all of these topics, and all of these different methodologies and data sets and things like that. So you want to give us a good idea of what you're asking and sort of what stage you're at, because we don't want to see a project that doesn't yet have access to the data, or doesn't yet have a plan to get the data, or again, if it's sort of like interview work that doesn't, if you don't have a relationship with the group of people you're going to interview, why would they talk to you? Why would they trust you as a researcher? So we want to see those details. We want to see information on sampling. We want to see information. We want to, as I mentioned previously, power calculations if you're doing causal work. Then, because when we are reading these proposals, we're sort of writing in the margins good ideas of who peer reviewers should be. But when we send it to those peer reviewers, they are in the same space. They have worked with the same data. They have used the same methods. And so you can feel free to get really nerdy on that section, like really dive into it, because they are going to understand it. Feel free to use whatever disciplinary jargon you feel like using, because it's likely that those reviewers will be able to understand those things. And that's the type of feedback that we really want to be able to give you once you get over that first hurdle, which is the RSF staff. I'll go over a couple more tips, like relatedly. The first thing you should do is make sure this project is a fit with the foundation's funding priorities. That can be done by either looking at our RFPs online for each of the program areas. It can be done with a quick email to programs@rsh.org with like a little abstract about your project. Like that can really make, we can give you a quick response there. Like, hey, is it worth me submitting a longer LOI? Here's a paragraph about my project. We can usually derive things from that. We want, as I mentioned previously, we want the research questions to drive the proposal. We don't want a fishing expedition where you're like, hey, I have this cool data. I don't know what I want to look for in it yet. We really want to see a question-driven proposal, and we want to see that the research design, data, and methods are well matched to those research questions. It's good to balance the proposal narrative. We don't need to see a lot on like investigator qualifications or a budget section at these early stage applications. That's the sort of, you're wasting your space. Like there's an opportunity cost if you give us 2 paragraphs on why you're the right investigator to do this and here are your qualifications. That's just a bunch of space that you could have used on your research design, which is something that we care about more. We'll look at your CV to determine expertise. And at the LOI stage and for the pipeline grants and for the dissertation grants, we don't need a budget. We only need a budget after, for regular research grants, we need a budget at the proposal stage. For those other projects, those other funding streams, the dissertation grants and the pipeline grants, we only ask for budgets from folks that we've already decided we're going to fund. And we work together to come up with a budget. So tell us, you can give us 1 sentence on the budget that gives us a sort of an idea of what you're asking for. Like, I'm asking for $50,000 for research assistant summer salary and participant incentives, period. That would be perfectly sufficient at that early stage. We just sort of want to have an idea of what you're going to be spending things on. We don't need a lot of detail on it. It's sort of good to anticipate reviewer questions and reviewer concerns. So like show that you have a full knowledge of the limitations of your data or the limitations of your methods, but make the argument and bring the citations about why this is the right way. Maybe there are no better data, or there is no better way to get at the question that we're looking at. And often, sometimes we have to start somewhere. So maybe it's like, here's where I want to start. Here's where the project is going long term. This is only a 1-year project. So here's what I want to do in that 1 year. I don't like when, especially early career folks, are sort of overly reactive to reviewer comments, because sometimes our reviewers forget that these are 1-year projects for, say, $35,000. And they try to like sort of turn this into a Frankenstein's monster that's like, oh, the PI should do X, Y, and Z, and they should think about doing this other thing and this other thing. And then the project has suddenly grown way beyond the scope. So it's just a good thing to show, like, yes, this is a starting point. Here's what I can do this year. Maybe in my future research agenda, these are things that I would like to do, because then that shows the reviewer that you have thought about these things. It's just not something that's going to be included in this proposal. I think I've mentioned a lot of the other things here already, like showing an understanding of the strengths and limitations of your approach. We do ask folks to respond to reviews. And so if you are asked to do that, even if you disagree with one of the reviewers, respond to them graciously, say, thank you, but I think you're mistaken. Here's why, bring the receipts. Here's the citations. Here's the thing that, here's how we're actually going to address that. And a dirty little secret here is there's actually no page limit to these responses. So you can really, if you are asked to respond, you can go into the level of detail that maybe you didn't have the space to in your initial narrative. Finally, the last 2 are just sort of like punctuality things, like submit on time, don't wait to the last minute. I know academics love to procrastinate, and I know it's sort of everyone thinks that they can improve their narrative up until the last minute. But I'll tell you again, like if you submit and then you find a typo, you can always email us and say, hey, I submitted and I found this typo. Can you replace the narrative with this version? And then you'll know at least you had something submitted, and we'll replace the updated version on the back end. And that's pretty easy for us to do. And then lastly, we get a lot more applications than we can fund. I think our funding rate, depending on the round, it's really denominator based, because we never know how many applications we're going to get per round. But our funding rate ranges probably from 7 to 12%. And sometimes it's just that you applied at the wrong time, and there was a lot of other projects maybe in the same area as yours or something like that, and we just weren't able to get about it. So if you get a rejection from us, go ahead and you can feel free to ask us, hey, is this something, did I get a rejection because the foundation doesn't want to know anything about this? Or did I get a rejection with like sort of, should I try again if I think I can incorporate reviewer concerns and address their concerns? I'll go a little bit more into detail on that here, because that first screen, which is similar to like a desk reject at a journal, is really the biggest hurdle to get over. I don't remember exact numbers, but I think we reject a majority of applications prior to peer review, just because we have concerns about reviewer burden and things like that. Most of the reasons things are not moved forward are because they just aren't priorities of the foundation. So that often means they're looking at things not focused in the US, or they have outcomes that aren't a priority of the foundation. Things like I said about health outcomes or issues of educational curricula. We're generally not funding routine analyses of existing publicly available data sets. This doesn't mean you can't use any of these data sets in your research. It just means that if you're just downloading the publicly available ACS and running regressions, that's not something we're particularly interested in. If you're merging that data set with something else, or if you have restricted data from one of those sets, that's a little bit more interesting to us. And you should, again, if you're worried about whether you're going to fall into any one of these categories, just feel free to email us. The second main reason folks get rejected at this stage is that it's just too preliminary. The research design isn't well developed enough. You are sort of, let's say you're proposing survey research, you don't have the instrument yet. You haven't pre-tested the instrument yet, or you don't have a way to get access to the data yet, or anything like that. It's sort of like it's just too preliminary. And we'll often advise you should just come back at one of the next rounds when maybe you've done a little bit more work. We do like to see, when possible, things like pilot data, preliminary work, even if it's just like, oh yeah, I pre-tested this, I tested this instrument on a small like Mechanical Turk sample or something like that. Those are all just showing us that you're really at the stage where, like, if we do fund it, it will go. What we don't want to happen is we decide to fund a project and then the money just sits there for 6 months because the researcher wasn't really ready to go yet. Because in that case, we could have funded a different project that round, and we could have waited around to fund that project. Most of for at least our research grants, there's 3 rounds a year. There's always another deadline coming that you can apply to the next one. So a lot of times we'll take preliminary work and say, just come back to us later. I'll say there's an asterisk on this, which is for the pipeline grants program. We are generally more willing to look at more preliminary work. So again, just feel free to shoot us an email like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Is this an appropriate time to apply to you? We can answer those questions if you have them. Other reasons for rejection are like clear design flaws, poorly written LOIs. Don't just copy and paste your proposal from NSF to the Russell Sage Foundation. Really try to make it for us. We can tell when this happens. We know when this happens. We've seen it before. And then finally, we prioritize research projects with strong descriptive or causal designs. We don't have a preference for causality. We love qualitative work as well. We love mixed methods work. We love innovative research designs. But we do, as I mentioned before, we do want those research designs to be well mapped to the research question. Andrew, do you want to go over this slide?
Yes, sorry, I was having trouble with my mute button. So there's some miscellaneous pointers. We like to advise you to use your networks in your department and your social media to get, to keep up to date on things that is going on with Russell Sage. We would also advise that anything that you need to do with your Office of Sponsored Projects, for example, maybe your project includes getting an IRB approval, get the ball rolling on that sooner rather than later, because that may delay you at further stages. That does not mean that when you submit your LOI that you need an IRB or anything else. At the LOI stage, you just need your LOI and the CV. But getting the ball rolling sooner rather than later is highly advised. Think about your budget, like Stephen mentioned before. Think about what is feasible within a year. You don't want to overpromise or make grandiose statements about what you're planning to do with your project. So when you're thinking about your budget, think about what is reasonable, what is within the time frame of the project that you're looking to do. And of course, the program staff are here as your resource. We're more than happy to answer questions about your project specifically. And we also encourage some people, if they choose, to send a one-page abstract so that we can review and give you some advice about whether or not your project is within the guidelines and funding priorities of the foundation. And again, our email is programs@rsage.org, and either of us will reach out to you there.
Yeah, so as Deandra mentioned, the programs@rsage.org email address is checked by multiple people here. So if one of us is on vacation, the other one can read it and things like that. I'm going to start going through some of the questions in the Q&A that I see. And so please use the Q&A function as we mentioned. The first couple I can do pretty quickly. We have a question about whether expenses for site visits, and for example, data must be assessed at a specific location, permissible for pipeline grants. That answer is yes. I'm assuming this means things like census, research data centers, or places where the data is proprietary. You can only use it at a certain location. Yeah, we fund travel to that location, hotels. Sometimes you need to pay for access to the site itself. Those are all permissible, both for our pipeline grants, actually for all of our research grants funding across the board. So our research grants, our pipeline grants, our dissertation grants, that funding is totally permissible. The pipeline grants funds are available in June 2024. Yeah, that's generally the timeline. If you apply this November, you can have funding for next summer is the goal. Sometimes there are delays if your university's some IRB takes a while to get approved. You don't need IRB at the time of application, but you do need IRB before the funds are dispersed. And sometimes universities take a long time to turn around a grant agreement, or they have issues with the contract language or something like that. But we generally have the goal of getting the funds to you by June or July of the following summer. We have a question about whether the 7-page limit for the application includes a CV. No, the CV is a separate upload. The 7 pages is the full proposal narrative. It does not include the citations either. So you have 7 pages to tell us what you're going to do, then include your citations, and then upload your CV separately. We have a question about whether course buyouts for pipeline are reliant on having teaching mode, but no, course buyouts in pipeline grants are specifically allowed regardless of what the teaching mode is. The teaching mode is only relevant to our regular research grants. We have a question on, are grants limited to traditional social science fields, or are they available to adjacent fields centering social science methods and theories? Yeah, we mention the big 4 traditional ones like psych, econ, sociology, and political science, because those are where a lot of our funding goes. But we also fund anthropology, and we fund history and legal scholars. And so, yes, adjacent fields that are using social science methods and theories are certainly welcome to apply. There's a question about iterative work that includes both exploratory and hypothesis-driven questions. Yeah, so yeah, that's a sort of, it depends where your project falls on that. We'll call it like a spectrum. If it's too much on the exploratory side, it'll probably be like, we'll be a little bit skeptical of whether it's a good fit. But if it's a little bit more on the hypothesis-driven side, that includes some exploratory questions, that we're probably a little bit more okay with it. I really encourage you to sort of reach out to figure out where that balance is best, like how to best figure out where you are on that. We have a question about the CV structure. We don't have a real preference for the format of the CV. A traditional academic CV is usually pretty good, but we do ask that they generally be shortened. We don't want one of these like 20-page CVs with everything you've ever done in your life. We sort of want like maybe a 5-page CV with your recent work. If there's questions about qualifications, like if you're maybe doing some work in an area that maybe it's not clear on your CV that you have expertise in, I would really encourage you to maybe in the narrative, even though I said don't give us too much on it, in the narrative, show why that you would be qualified to do it. Maybe if it's like, hey, I haven't published any qualitative work yet, but I did take this qualitative research methods training last summer, or something like that. So things like that are helpful just to give us a better idea of what is where you are and how you are qualified. Sorry, I'm figuring out where I am.
Oh, I'm just going to jump in real quick. So there's a question here. If we have questions about which grants program is most applicable for the dissertation grants, should we send a future of work or immigration? Should we send the abstract to the program's email address? Yes, please email us any abstract or whatever you'd like to for us to look over. But I should clarify that it doesn't really matter like where, if you are future of work or immigration or social political, that it all goes into the same review process. I would just say, review our website, look at what our funding priorities are for future of work or for immigration, and see, and I mean, you'd have to determine if your project fits future of work better. You could apply under future of work, and if we feel that, what this project is actually more SPEI or social, political, economic inequality, all we do is move it over. It doesn't actually impact the review process. And this isn't just for dissertation grants. This is also for pipeline. This is for research, visiting scholars. They all go through the same review process.
Yeah, and a related question just came in about whether research on racial inequality is better suited for our race, ethnicity, immigration program or our inequality program. This is very related to what Deandra was just saying. We completely understand that there's a ton of overlap between our program areas. Luckily, we're a relatively small shop. We're not very siloed. Unlike a large place like NSF, where if you apply to the wrong program, you might just not get funding because they might not look at it. Here at Russell Sage, if you apply to what you could argue would be the wrong program, we'll just move it over and it's no big deal. Really just sort of apply to the one that you think fits best for the project you're working on. We don't necessarily have a real rubric for what makes a racial inequality project more on the race ethnicity side or on the social, political, economic inequality side. A lot of times what we'll make the decision on is based on the expertise of our advisory committee members in each of those programs. So if we think that the advisory committee members in one of the committees is a better match to evaluate your project and the reviews, then we'll probably move it over there. But there have been occasions where there are projects that are sort of right down the middle in that Venn diagram. They're in that middle section between two of our program areas. And we actually have had two advisory committees or sort of parts of each advisory committee evaluate a proposal. So that's sort of it doesn't really matter is the answer to that. And again, if you have any questions about that, or like if you want a little bit more guidance, sending us a short, like 1-paragraph abstract would always be helpful. I think that's all of the questions, if we've done this correctly. As always, if we did not get to your question or if I missed it, I apologize, but please email us at programs@rsage.org. At this point, you're still well ahead of the deadline. When I say academics procrastinate, I'm not exaggerating. A vast majority of our questions come in the last week before deadline, and a vast majority of our submissions come in on the day that they are due. So if you do things a little bit ahead of time, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead of a deadline, we probably have time to actually answer your email. If you come to us last minute, you'll be lucky if we have the time or energy to give you a quick response. We will try, but it's really to your advantage to email us sooner with any sort of, hey, what do you think about this project? Is this a good fit? Or, hey, I have 2 projects I'm thinking about. Maybe you can tell me which one is a better fit, or any sort of discussions like that. We're always willing to have, as long as it's sort of more than a couple of weeks ahead of the deadline. I don't know. What do you think, Deandra? It seems like we've answered all the questions so far. Thank you to everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Great. Enjoy the rest of your day, and please feel free to check out our website and sign up for our newsletter.